we come to the elephant in the room of the Star Trek series, especially the original Star Trek series. Now, we've talked about how the odd number Star Trek films always seemed to be the weakest of the lot, and yeah, that pattern holds up. But whereas Star Trek 3, and this is in most people's eyes, Star Trek 3 is seen as flawed but not offensive. It's kind of a filler one. You know, it's nothing great, but you know, it's the quantum of solace of the Star Trek universe. You know, Quantum of Solace is a Bond movie, isn't bad, it's just kind of there. And I think a lot of people kind of view Star Trek 3 that way. But when it comes to Star Trek 5, this is the one that a lot of people kind of do their about, and feel that it is, if you can use the term, the worst of the original Star Trek films. And it's hard to deny, again, watching the interviews and whatnot for it, that you could tell that everybody involved with it, with the making of it, was trying not to say that, God, this was a rough production, God, this was, this didn't work, or whatever. But you can kind of read between the lines. You can see it in the way they're talking, in the way they're kind of dancing around certain elements. And the element that I think most of them are dancing around is the director. And the director for this one was William Shatner, who also came up with part of the story. In what feels like a bit of sour grapes and a bit of, whatever you can do, I can do better, trying to, apparently his condition for coming back for Star Trek 4 was that he had to direct Star Trek 5. And I would bet that was more than a little ego bruise from the fact that Leonard Nimoy directed the last two and was getting a lot of praise for them. So he decided he was going to take over and direct this one. And the results are mixed. And you can't really deny some of the issues with this movie. Now, that all being said, we're going to talk about all of it. I still say that this is a pretty good movie, and I think actually an interesting one that lends a lot of really fascinating elements to the Star Trek universe. In fact, I feel like this has some of the best scenes of the original cast's tenure. So I don't think this film is terrible. I think it has problems, and its problems, unlike Search for Spock, I think the problems are a lot more, up front. They're not hidden as well. So let's talk about this movie, its problems, its virtues, and then see where we come. So what's the story? Well, in this one, the crew of the Enterprise is sent to to rescue some hostages who have been captured by this Vulcan fanatic named Sybok. When they get there, they themselves are captured, and Sybok takes over the Enterprise and takes the Enterprise to a place in the center of the galaxy in search of a mythical planet called Shakari, which, when you strip away, they say it straight out, but long story short, he takes the Enterprise on a mission to find God. To find, not in a metaphorical sense, he is literally looking for God. That apparently this Shakari place is supposed to be the place where all life in the universe sprang from, and that's why every culture has their myth of, or their own belief of, where life began. Okay? So, interesting story. Let's talk about the issues first, and then we'll talk about the benefits of this film. So first things first, we got to talk about the direction. I'm not going to say that William Shatner is a bad director, because I think there are some parts in this film that are really well directed. But I don't think he's a good director for this type of film. You got to be. It takes a special kind of directors have their strong points, you know, and it takes a special kind of director to do an effects-driven, big budget, big idea science fiction film like this. And I think Shatner does pretty well with the more intimate scenes that we'll talk about, but the bigger scenes, the overall visual identity of the film is all over the place. This is by far the cheapest looking of the Star Trek films. This is some of the cheapest that Star Trek has ever looked, and I'm even considering, you know, the 60s when, you know, they were wearing t-shirts for uniforms. The world looks very cheap and very flat. Part of what makes a great universe, and I'm going to cover this with other movies, you know, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, Star Trek, Star Wars, is the believability of the universe, the believability of the places these people live and work. You have to believe, no matter how fantastic the location is, that lives actually occur there, that they have rules, they have, you know, a society, whatever. And this film, in much of it, it feels flat. The special effects are by far the worst Star Trek has ever looked on the big screen. They apparently had a lot of problems with their special effects guy, especially with the ships and the models, and it looks awful. Like, some of the green screening in this is so bad. The special effects in Masters of the Universe look better than this. And it's laughable. It really is laughable. On the subject of laughable, one of the things I talked about being the strengths of Star Trek 4 was it was humorous. It was a very lighthearted adventure. But one of the things I kept repeating, because I do that, is the fact that when the comedy worked its best was when the comedy was born out of the situation and the character. Scotty, the great engineer, not knowing how to work a Macintosh computer. That works and that's funny. But I also pointed out that where the humor didn't work as much is when it started to make the characters look stupid. You know, Chekhov in that one where he's being interrogated was the example I gave. And in this one, because the humor was such a big selling point of Star Trek 4, they wanted humor in this one too. Okay, fair enough. Star Trek has always had great humor, but it's always had very dry humor. Slapstick, goofiness, that has never really been its strong suit. And this movie, while it has some great funny moments, it also has some moments that lean way too into the cartoony. And unfortunately, the main victims of this are not the trinity of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. It's the co-stars. It's Scotty, it's Uhura, it's Chekhov, it's Sulu. You know, the comedy is done very much at the expense of their characters, and done for no other reason than to get a yada da 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 da. You know, I'm not saying that all the comedy in this falls flat. It doesn't. There's some really good dry responses. I think this has one of probably my favorite Scotty line of all time, even more than "There be whales here." What are you standing around for? Do you not know a jailbreak when you see one? Love that line. But the supporting cast really gets it hard here. Uhura, who I have said repeatedly doesn't get a lot to do in these movies, finally gets something to do. And what is that something? A naked fan dance to distract the bad guys. That is what she is known for in the Star Trek movies. What a great way to utilize your only female character. I have no idea how she took it, if she felt it was bad or whatnot. I got the feeling, again, from the interviews, oddly enough, once again, from the interviews that they do on the DVD anniversary collections of these, it's always with Shatner and Nimoy and the producers and writers. None of the other cast are ever featured. That's interesting, I find. But they kind of said, oh, you know, she was game for it. Yeah, being game for it doesn't mean you like it. So I don't know how she felt about it, but just watching it, it's like, really? That's the best you could come up with for her? Going back to the special effects. So not only do the external special effects, the ships and everything look bad, but a lot of the practical special effects look terrible. There are twice in this movie. You can see the fucking wires. There's a scene where Kirk is fighting Sybok, and Sybok is like throwing them all around, and you can fucking see the wire. There's a point where Kirk gets hit by, the alien force beam, he's thrown back. You can see the fucking pull cord. Look, mistakes in movies happen. They really do. And, so it's fun as a movie guy to go through and go, oh, look, you can see that, or, oh, that wasn't supposed to happen, or you can see that over there. That's fun. But seriously, dude, I expect shit like that many of them, I expect in an Ed Wood movie, not in a multi-million-dollar Star Trek film. You also got to take into consideration, however, that Star Trek was in a very weird place, and I'm sure Shatner had to be in a weird place directing this film. Because up until this point, the original films were the only game in town. They were Star Trek. This movie came out in 1989, but in 1987, something very interesting happened. That was the premiere of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Now, I don't think it's a mystery or a secret to hardcore Trek fans that the first season of Next Generation is pretty much garbage. It's terrible. It's almost unwatchable, outside of 1 or 2 episodes. Season 2 is also in that vein, but it's starting to break out of its skin. It's starting to find its path. There are more episodes in that one that I like. When this movie came out, Season 3 had just begun, and Season 3 is credited where Next Generation really finds its stride, and it's starting to make its own identity, and it's starting to be recognized as possibly better than the original. So that's a lot of pressure going into, but you can see that in this movie just by certain little telltale things. For instance, a lot of the sets, the hallway sets, those are from the Next Generation. The theme music, oh my god, the theme music for this movie, each one of these films up until this point has had a different theme over the opening credits. You know what this one has? The theme song to Star Trek: The Next Generation. So they're clearly, I don't know, I would say that's a studio mandate. I would almost guarantee it. They're really trying to invoke that feeling that people were starting to get from the Next Generation in this. So that's got to feel like a bit of a slap in the face. So there are problems with this film. Very, very overt and obvious problems. And I think that's why this one kind of gets shunned a little bit, whereas people kind of forgive the flaws in Search for Spock, because the flaws are, I think, hidden a bit better. They're under the surface. They're subtextual. Here, the problems are very overt. They're right out in your face. So then why do I still like this one more than I like Search for Spock? Why am I willing to forgive a lot of that? Because I think there's a lot of good going on in this movie. And just as we have to blame Shatner for some of the flaws of it, I think we also have to give him credit for some of this film's benefits. First of all, let's talk about the story. This is a bold, interesting story, and it was something that Star Trek had never done. Now, fans of things like Deep Space Nine may find that weird, because Deep Space Nine is all about religion and exploring the different types and the different ways people interact with religion. But up until this movie, Star Trek had never gotten into religion. Gene Roddenberry, deliberately avoided it. And William Shatner, being a very devout Jew, just as Leonard Nimoy was, religion was a big part of his life, and he wanted to explore that. And I think the story he came up with had a lot of great elements and a lot of common themes and connecting themes, which, as you remember, is one of the things I pointed out a lot in Star Trek 3 that it didn't have. This concept of going and searching for ultimate knowledge. Its concept of its villain. I don't even like calling Sybok a villain, because I don't think he's a villain. I think he's more of an antagonist, because his motives are not evil. He's not trying to hurt anybody or do anything, even really for personal gain. He's trying to do what a lot of people do, and he's trying to find God. You never think that he's insincere, but like so many other people, he goes down the wrong path to do it. I like that the villain in this is a Vulcan who rejects the Vulcan teachings of logic and embraces emotion. That's a great kind of fallen religious leader who now is starting up not so much a cult, but a religious army. That's a great metaphor for that character. I like also, again, spoilers here. I like that the ultimate theme of it is this guy went out looking for God, but what he found was the devil. Not literally, but what it is, and you have to watch this movie a lot to kind of connect the pieces, is that what they find is this creature, they never say what it is, that's been imprisoned on this one world, way, way, way out there for so long. Very powerful creature who somehow has sent out visions to people of his being there, trying to get somebody to come there and release him so he could escape. So these people that he has sent these visions to have misinterpreted this as religious visions. He's played on their beliefs and he's played on their desire for knowledge to basically get them to do what he wants. So when they get there and they find not God, but the devil, and you find that Sybok all this time has been, unknowingly to himself, a false prophet. I think there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not a religious person. Spiritual, not religious. So I don't know what a religious person's take on this would be. But from my objective standpoint, I think this isn't an indictment of religion. It is saying belief is good, and that desire to believe in something larger than yourself is a good thing. But you got to be careful where you're getting your messages from, and how feverishly are you doing whatever you're being told without stopping to think, hey, is this the right path, or is this really what God would want, quote unquote? So I think it's a really interesting story, and one that you can tell William Shatner really had a lot of faith in, no pun intended. He was really passionate about telling it, and I respect that. Another thing this film does incredibly well, and I've criticized these movies for always being about Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, but this film, the other theme that this film has is brotherhood and male friendship. Sybok turns out to be Spock's actual brother, half-brother, but still a blood brother. So Spock is now, there is the conflict of being torn between your blood family, your blood brother, and your surrogate family, the people that have become your brothers over time and through friendship and all that. This film really examines the friendship of these characters. And I've said this before, male friendship, heterosexual male friendship and camaraderie is not a topic that a lot of movies deal with. They're uncomfortable dealing with it. They're uncomfortable dealing with the concept of heterosexual men loving each other in a way that is not sexual. They don't know how to convey that message. And this film builds upon the decades of history that's already there and expands upon it. Some of the best scenes in this movie, the opening scene, they're all camping. They're on shore leave, and Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are all camping in Yellowstone. And there are just a scene of them around a campfire talking and singing and doing row, row, row your boat. Another internet critic who I used to really like but have since lost pretty much all respect for, did a review of this movie, and he made a big joke of the row, row, row your boat scene. You know, but the row, row, row your boat scene is a very critical part, not just of this movie, but of the Trek canon as a whole. It is not, there's no villain they're fighting at that point. There's no greater mission. It's just these three guys bonding and seeing the friendship between them and how they are a family. They're arguing with each other and they're snipping at each other, but it's not in a negative way. Okay? So that scene is just, it's phenomenal. Well written, well directed, well acted, all the way around from all of them. It's great. It's one of the best scenes in Trek. Another one of the best scenes in Trek comes in this. So Sybok, our antagonist, the way that he is recruiting people in his army is he seems to have this ability to ease pain that people are feeling. He keeps saying this thing when he meets people, says, your pain runs deep. Let me share your pain with me. Let me feel your pain, and it'll clear your soul, and you can see clearly. A religious person saying, oh, let me heal you with my touch, kind of thing. But here it is, whatever he's doing, and they never really go into the explanation of what it is he actually does. But he's going around trying to ease people's pains and take their pain away. And again, not in a malicious way. He's not doing it to be evil. He really thinks he's doing it to help people, even though he's then manipulating them into helping him. But anyway, so they have a scene where he is doing this to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Show me your pain. What is your pain? What's the deepest pain you ever felt? And there is a man. I said it in Star Trek 3 or 4, and I'll say it again here. DeForest Kelley was by far the best actor out of the three of them, and his character is by far the best, in my opinion. I love Bones. And they show this scene where Bones has to turn off life support on his father. And just being a doctor and not being able to cure his father, and making that ultimate choice of, ending the life of the person you love the most, and what that does to him. Man, DeForest Kelley, it is a heartbreaking scene. It is wrenching. And from what I understand, apparently, a few months before they actually shot the film, his father really did die. So a lot of what you're seeing up there is very raw and very real, and he is, man, it's great. And it's what I like, even not so much even more, but what I also like in terms of this plot device is Kirk's response to it when Sybok says, I'll take your pain away, and he says, I don't want my pain taken away. The pain is what makes me who I am. The pain is what informs my decisions. I don't want my pain taken away. I need my pain. And it was a good set of lines and a decent performance from Shatner. He gets a lot of crap for his performance, and rightfully so. He does go over the edge a lot. But I think in that moment, he was really good, and it was a really good scene. In that concept of we all have pain in our hearts that we wish we could get rid of. But if you do, that takes away from the person you are. They say it in Doctor Who, pain and loss define us just as much as happiness and victory. And you have to acknowledge that, and Kirk and the characters are not to run from their pain, but to embrace it as part of who they are. Again, though, I gotta say, so that is brilliant. I love that. But the only negative I'll say to this is, of course, the only ones we get to see it with are Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. We have no idea what these deeper character moments are for Sulu, for Chekhov, for Uhura, whom he somehow brainwashes, so it means they must have had great pain. What was Uhura's pain? What was Sulu's pain? What was Chekhov's pain? We never get to know because they're not the main characters. Admittingly, it would have taken forever to do all this. But it would have been interesting maybe to see the bond of this crew and not just these three people. That's a nitpick, really. Not a deal breaker in any sense of the word, but just kind of one of those things that's like, I think we should give ups to Shatner for letting Spock and McCoy have those moments. You know, he's such a scene hog. But anyway, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Real quick before I go, let's just talk about this. So one thing, again, another critical thing I've heard about this movie, and I don't disagree with it, is that they never really do explain how Sybok is doing the show me your pain thing. How is he projecting it out so people can see it? How are they, how does he know and all of that? They never go into it. So just for my own nerdification, and for fellow Star Trek nerds, I've come up with a theory, and if you like it, then accept it. If you don't worry about it. So we know that Vulcans are mildly telepathic. That's what the mind meld is. They have that ability to link minds and experience emotion through another people's mind. We see that from Spock multiple times, and we see it with other Vulcans throughout the rest of Trek's canon, which had yet to be written at this point. So what I always attribute this to is that his ability to feel someone else's pain is a focused form of the mind meld. Because he has forsaken logic for emotion, what that, in my opinion, means is that his telepathic abilities are way more empathic in nature. He feels people's emotions, and the ability he has of projecting them out and showing them is an extension of the mind meld. In later iterations, Spock never did it, but in later iterations of the meld, whoever's giving the meld, Tuvok in Voyager, for example, he always says, my mind to your mind, my thoughts to your thoughts, supposed to be the thing that starts connecting people. Every time Sybok says, starts with, he says the exact same thing. Your pain runs deep, share your pain with me. I think it's the same thing. It's establishing the telepathic connection. That's just my fan theory. You don't have to agree with it. I think it just helps. So, where do we come down on Star Trek V? It's a flawed film. It is. It's flawed in the directing is not as strong as it has been. The story does not flow as well as it does. A lot of it, there's a lot of cheapness to it. A lot of, tongue-in-cheek is fine, but when your tongue bursts through the side of your face, that's not so good. But the themes that it's tackling are really interesting. The way it's tackling them is really interesting. And the character exploration, and especially the relationship between our core characters, is really interesting and incredibly well done. So I will concede, I think of all the Trek films, this is the most flawed and the most troubled and, all that. But I am going to say that I still think it's better than Search for Spock, because at least this one had a story it wanted to tell. It had a point it wanted to make. And, I think that passion for the story makes up, in my mind, for some of the some of the flaws in the making of it. My opinion, I understand, not always a popular one, but there you go. I think it's a worthy holder in the Trek canon. Well, that's 5. And we've gone on a long journey with the original cast of Star Trek, through old villains, death and life, rebirth, religion, environmentalism, and everything in between. But as Q would once tell Picard, all good things must come to an end, and every journey has a final step. And for the crew of the original Star Trek Enterprise, there is one last great adventure to go on as a group. And we will explore that next time when we travel with the crew of the Starship Enterprise to the undiscovered country. So, until next time, live long and prosper, and drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.